Hi there, Chris. You are better every day and starting from a very high standard. You are just on fire every day.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for everything you do for us to keep us informed.
Good morning, Chris. Love your show, pal.
This is Philadelphia's Morning Answer with Chris Stigall on Philadelphia's AM 990, The Answer, and 990theanswer.com.
As we look ahead to 2022, two critical offices come up for grabs. The governor of Pennsylvania, the Senate seat, the United States Senate seat in Pennsylvania. We're covering them both with great interest. There are many folks who are interested in the offices on the Republican side. We're trying to bring them all to you so you can meet them, get a sense of them. Ultimately, you make the decision who you'd like to be the nominee to take on who we presume on the gubernatorial side is going to be Josh Shapiro. So we bring in a candidate for governor who you may or may not know yet, but you're going to hear a lot more about, I'm sure, Charlie Giroux, who declared his candidacy quite a bit ago, as a matter of fact. And Mr. Giroux, we welcome you in. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris. Please call me Charlie, and please add my voice to that little promo intro you have there because I'm a big fan of yours.
Oh, that's kind. I appreciate it, sir. Thanks so much. We've not had the pleasure of speaking before on the show, but I hope this won't be your first visit, or your last visit, I should say. Tell people a little about yourself, because I don't know that necessarily everybody in the audience knows Charlie Giroux yet, but give us a little of your background.
Well, I'm hoping that they will. As you know, Chris, I was raised in the Delaware Valley, grew up in Bucks County, and went to school in Montgomery County. And I thought I was a Division I athlete, Chris, but I couldn't find any coaches that agreed. So I came out to Central Pennsylvania to college to play there, and went back to Villanova Law School. You know, that's the cross I have to bear. But I'm a recovering lawyer, and as I tell folks, I am one, but I don't play one on TV. But, Chris, you know, despite the fact that I grew up in Pennsylvania and have had my entire career, have never left the state since coming here, I wasn't born here. I was born in a slum in southern Brazil, and my birth mother realized that she couldn't take care of me. So she took me to a little mission and put me up for adoption, and she had only one request of those people. She wanted me to be adopted by Americans, because in her mind's eye, she believed that if I came to the United States of America, the greatest nation in the history of the world, I might be able to learn how to read. And so when I talk about opportunity, which was really at the core of my campaign, and more importantly, the freedom to pursue those opportunities, you know, it comes from the bottom of my heart. Real quickly, I began my career with Ronald Reagan. I worked for him on and off for 25 years, including the arrangements for his funeral. I'm the vice chairman of CPAC. I'm sure you're familiar with CPAC today. So my credentials as a solid conservative, I think, are unblemished and unquestioned, and that's where I begin my campaign, talking about from the people, for the people, and about freedom. You have been around this business for a long time, this business of governing and politics, people running races. Like you said, you know CPAC well, and that's often where, on the national stage, you see a lot of rising stars come and petition the base, the faithful, and there's often, you know, I don't want to make it sound worse than it is, but sometimes it can get kind of ugly. These primaries get crowded. A lot of people want to jump in and they want to make the case. Why do you think there's so many people, candidly, that want to be governor of Pennsylvania? I mean, it's getting crowded, and it's getting more crowded all the time. Both the Senate seat that Pat Toomey's vacating and this governor's race, which I know is your purview. So there's a lot of people jumping in, and I think it gets confusing and splintered fast for Republican voters. What would you say to them? I agree with you. And, you know, the fact that there are now almost 15 candidates for governor, either who have announced or who say they're going to, in some ways is a good thing, Chris, because it says that the conservative side of the electorate believes that we can win next year. And it's so vitally important that we do. You mentioned Josh Shapiro. I'm telling folks out on the campaign trail that Josh Shapiro is worse than Tom Wolf, as hard to imagine as that might be. And that if we had 4 years of Josh Shapiro as governor, we'd be looking back at the Wolf administration as the good old days. So it's vitally important that we win the governorship next year and that we keep and retain that Senate seat so that we can get the majority in the U.S. Senate and get things back to at least some semblance of normality, Chris. I don't know if we ever get to normal, but to get back to some reason and logic and conservative values in Washington. And I think that the large number of candidates indicates that folks believe we can win. I think the cream will rise to the top. I think this process will winnow out some of the candidates that really aren't that serious. But I will tell you this, Chris, I'm in it to the end.
You, Charlie, you like you said, you go back to the Reagan days, so you've been around Pennsylvania politics for a long time. How do you read the room amongst Pennsylvania Republicans today? I mean, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know I've been more than critical of sort of establishment party politics in Pennsylvania for a long time, and I don't, Donald Trump kind of upset that apple cart, and I think there's a real divide amongst the base voters in Pennsylvania and a lot of the folks that call themselves the party of GOP in Pennsylvania. Is that mendable? Do you see that divide? Is that still a real issue in Harrisburg?
No, there is a divide, Chris, and I think the divide largely is between some of the quote-unquote establishment folks and the rank and file, or, as I prefer to call them, the grassroots activists. And I go to these meetings now, Chris, of grassroots activists, whether they call them patriots or Tea Party folks or whatever, and that's where the energy is. But in order to win, we've got to fuse both of those factions or coalitions or whatever you want to call them. And I've always been a coalition builder. They, called me for 20-plus years the conservative happy warrior. They say Charlie Giroux is the conservative happy warrior. I kind of like that, and so I've adopted that as my mantra. And I think it's vitally important. I know it is. In order to win next year, and I think everybody on the right side wants to win, we've got to bring everybody together, build a coalition that we haven't had before, add some people to it. And I'm talking particularly about the minority community, which, as you know, given my story, I may be able to uniquely do. May be able to uniquely do. And I think that that's where victory comes for conservatives next year.
Charlie Giroux is running for the Republican nomination to take on, presumably, Josh Shapiro on the Democrat side to be the next governor of Pennsylvania. Issue one for you, Charlie? I mean, as you've, I assume, traveled the Commonwealth and spoken to people, what's issue one? Or what would you, if you were to bulletize maybe two or three? First item of business of your governor, Giroux.
Well, I think that the key is going to be for any governor to restore our economy, to get it back from the lockdowns, shutdowns, arbitrary and capricious actions of the Governor Wolf's administration, and provide the opportunity that Pennsylvanians want for their own personal wealth creation and prosperity, but also for Pennsylvania's economy. And I think that begins with education. And I've been pushing very strongly for school choice, for parental control, and not just for those words, but for the specific policy initiatives that will bring us those things, because I think it's vitally important that we get back to teaching basics so that our kids aren't indoctrinated and where parents truly are in charge. And I think election integrity is still very much a part of the mix. And we've got to get to a point where people believe that the elections are fairly conducted, that votes are fairly counted, because if we don't, there truly are no winners.
Could you see on the election integrity front, I guess I have a couple of specific questions related to what you just listed, but let me start with election integrity and work back. Could you see if you're governor and you have you have a Republican legislature, could you see repealing Act 77 that has given so many of us a lot of heartburn, that kind of basically broadened the mail-in vote? Do you see mail-in voting as a problem in Pennsylvania?
In a word, absolutely, Chris. There's no question in my mind that we opened the door to the potential for significant fraud by introducing, basically no excuse mail-in voting. I think it's a disaster, Act 77. I actually filed an amicus brief in the Kelly case. If you're familiar with it, the Kelly case would have declared Act 77 unconstitutional. There still are some cases, by the way, that would ultimately declare Act 77 unconstitutionally, kind of winding their way through the court system, and I hope that they're successful. Act 77 was a disaster. Can't candy coat it. It should be repealed. It won't be repealed as long as Tom Wolf has the veto pen in his hand. But if Charlie Giroux has the pen in his hand, I hate to talk in the third party. If I have the pen in my hand, Chris, it'll get signed.
Charlie, do you think amongst your Republican colleagues or would-be Republican colleagues in Harrisburg, a lot of them, and a lot of them have come on this show and admitted that they voted for it, and had they known then what they know now, they wouldn't have. Do you think that there is going to be ego or wounded pride in trying to repeal it? Do you think you could get the Republican legislature to pass a repeal?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a little bit of that, but I think most Republicans in Harrisburg have come to the realization that they made a big mistake. And, I loved when Ronald Reagan signed a tax bill, my hero. He said, worst damn mistake I ever made. That, solves a lot of problems, heals a lot of wounds, and moves you forward. And I think that Act 77 can get repealed. But in the interim, the Republican legislature, Chris, ought to be doing things that would, pass the muster of public opinion in such huge ways that even Tom Wolfe might be guilt-tripped into signing it, which would ratchet down the way that these mail-in absentee ballots are used right now, so that there is uniformity in how they're collected, how they're processed, that there are some specific rules about how things have to be done. Because right now it's a hodgepodge. It's a total mess. We're finding boxes of ballots here and there and, locked in closets, et cetera. Simply can't have that. People have to have faith in the integrity of our electoral process.
You know that one of the rising stars in the Republican Party, at least for those of us who are watching it out here, are people like Governor DeSantis of Florida. And he regularly will take to the microphone and address schools. You mentioned education, Charlie Giroux, running for governor here in Pennsylvania on the Republican side. He has routinely told school districts, masks can be optional, but you will not mandate them, and we will fight you. If it comes to taking your funding, we'll fight you on mandating masks in school, and then certainly on deck vaccination talk. How do you feel about these issues as it comes to schools in Pennsylvania? Would you be as aggressive as a guy like DeSantis?
I would be as aggressive as a man like DeSantis. I think Governor DeSantis has done a great job. I wrote some columns, Chris, early in the pandemic, praising what Governor DeSantis was doing, was loudly criticized in some parts of Pennsylvania for doing so. But I think his model works much better than the arbitrary and capricious orders of Tom Wolfe, the mandates about vaccinations, the mandates about masks, the mandates about every aspect of our life. I'm a great believer in individual liberty and individual freedom. And I think that when people are making decisions for themselves about what's best for their families and best for their own individual health, that we're all a lot better off for it. So I am opposed to mandates, have been from day one. Nobody had to lead me by the hand into being opposed to them. I saw from the get-go how disastrous they truly are.
Pretty fascinating, Charlie Giroux, that the Pennsylvania School Board Association withdrew from the National School Board Association after this issue of Merrick Garland threatening to sic the FBI on school board meetings and parents who come to speak up. Pennsylvania the School Board Association led on withdrawing from the National School Board Association. What does that tell you?
Well, they did, and there have been, as you know, Chris, several other states that have withdrawn from the National School Boards Association.
Yes.
And the National School Boards Association recanted and retracted that ridiculous letter, which was purely political, drafted with the help of the Biden administration, which then went to Merrick Garland, and he used as the basis for issuing what was one of the most absurd and frightening letters I've ever seen. That directive of early October to the FBI to check out parents who might be showing up at school board meetings to express their opposition to mask mandates or vaccine mandates or critical race theory or the 1619 movement or transgender sports or a whole bunch of things, that somehow they were now going to be considered domestic terrorists. It was one of the worst examples of the incredible overreach of Washington power, and who, as you may recall, Chris, was being touted as a great moderate for the Supreme Court, has refused to back down, despite the fact that the National School Boards Association withdrew their own letter, which was the predicate for his decision. So I echoed the words of Tom Cotton in saying, thank God that Merrick Garland never got onto the Supreme Court.
This, I hate to make it sound as though it's a litmus test, but I know this audience is always curious, and so I'll ask it. In terms of election 2020 in Pennsylvania, how do you read it? There are people in this audience who are wholeheartedly convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Joe Biden did not rightly and fairly win Pennsylvania. Now, there are some, like me, who would say, despite allegations or proof of fraud, the entirety of the election, I think, is invalid only because it was unconstitutional. But there are some that believe that Philadelphia will continue to be a source of massive, rampant fraud, and Democrats will always find votes late, and thus our elections will never be free and fair in Pennsylvania until it's fixed. So how do you view 2020? Do you believe Donald Trump rightly won Pennsylvania or not? And do you believe in an audit?
There's no question, Chris, that there were some significant problems in 2020. And bluntly, that's why we do need an audit. I mean, I'm in business. We get audited regularly. Never really like it, but I've never had anything to hide. So I lay the documents on the desk and put them on the table and say, have at it to the auditors. If you've got nothing to hide, why would you be concerned about an audit? And I think the fact that many people do still believe that there's massive fraud in Philadelphia and that it will continue. And bluntly, we saw problems again last Tuesday that are very concerning. So I think we've got to come up with rules that will be followed, that make it virtually impossible to cheat, but still easy to vote. And I think that that's not that difficult to do. And I think we have to get at it. It's always difficult for me to imagine why Harrisburg can't move a little faster.
Yeah, I mean, they're still counting ballots in Josh Shapiro's Montgomery County, which is so unnerving.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very disturbing, Chris. And you know where those ballots end up being in the total vote count. And so people become incredibly cynical. But I will say this to every one of your listeners that doesn't want to participate because of potential voter fraud, and that is this. If you don't participate, it's not a protest, it's a surrender. And we don't surrender. We will continue to fight for fair and honest elections. We'll continue to fight for lower taxes. We'll continue to fight for individual freedom, because that really is at the core of who we are as Americans, and it's at the core of how we are successful as Pennsylvanians in the future.
Charlie Giroux, that's spelled G-E-R-O-W, if you're wondering, G-E-R-O-W. Charlie Giroux, where can people find more information about you or reach out and be helpful if they'd like?
Thank you for spelling it, Chris, because I got to tell you, with G-E-R-O-W as your last name, I get more pronunciations than even I can keep track of. And if any of your listeners would want to get in touch with me, and I hope they will, it's pretty easy. We eliminated Giroux. We just have charlieforgovernor.com, charlieforgovernor.com. And if you'll allow me, Chris, I'll put my own private cell number out on the air. Is that all right?
Oh, wow. Okay, sure.
Not many gubernatorial candidates will do that, but I think it's very important that if people want to talk to the candidate, talk to me, they can do it. So my phone number is 717-877-8194, 717-877-8194.
Wow,
And you don't have to spell Giroux to call me.
Charlie Giroux, one candidate at a time, one phone call at a time. I like your moxie. Charlie, thank you for your time today. I hope you'll come back and talk to us throughout the primary season, sir. And certainly if you end up becoming the nominee, I hope we'll talk a whole lot.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be with you. I will come back anytime with great pleasure. And please put my voice on there. I'm a fan of Chris Stigall. Chris, I love your show.
Thank you, Charlie. That's Charlie Giroux, Charlie for Governor, or here's his cell. Jot it down for those of you that would like to speak with him personally, 717-877-8194. So there you have it. 610-850-0990 is our telephone number, 610-850-0990. What'd you think? Your reaction? This is starting to get, as Charlie and I were talking, I mean, there are